Welcome to the Dev Dream Podcast, featuring conversations to keep both you and me inspired in our journey of making games. Now, today I sat down with Kai, aka Ink Ribbon Games / Ink Ribbon Tutorials over on YouTube. Now, Kai is an important person for me to interview because he is exactly one step ahead of where I and many of you actually want to be. And that is that he has released exactly one commercial Steam game. It didn't make him rich, but he learned a ton and now has the tools to do it again and go even bigger. So I got to pick his brain about how his game, 100 Doors, did on Steam and how he actually got that first game released. Now, he's also, as I mentioned, a bit of a horror YouTuber. And so it was interesting to ask him how his game, which is a liminal space kind of horror subgenre, did and how it interacted with his audience. Lastly, he also is a university student and has a degree in game design or game development or something like that. So we got to talk about the value or non-value of that. And before we get to the video, I want to let you know that I'm looking for people to help me keep this channel going, and I'm doing so in the form of channel memberships. I have memberships starting as low as $5, and one perk is that you get to submit questions to future guests. Now, a couple teasers that I have coming on, pending scheduling, are Edmund McMillan, Sam Yam, and Marnix from Bite Me Games. So I have some really exciting ones coming up, and if you want to be able to submit questions for those guests, check out joining channel memberships down below. Now, without further ado, let's get straight to this great conversation. I think it's good to have you on. I think you're a little bit of a unique guest for two reasons. One, you have released a game, but, I think it's important not to just interview the people that have made $500,000 and have wild success, but people that have the success of releasing a good game that they're proud of and to any amount of fame. But also, you are more of like a traditional YouTuber in that you have a gaming channel focused a lot on horror games, but then you also have like a game dev channel. So I'm just so curious to touch base on all of those things. But can you just start by I'm curious to just, build the lore for people to help understand you. Can you help to tell people about your gaming channel first so that they can understand how you're kind of existing on the internet?
Well, yeah, I primarily that's my main day job is running the channel called Ink Ribbon, which is the third largest Resident Evil channel on YouTube. I'm very proud of that. And it's just nerdy ramblings about Resident Evil lore primarily. I talk about other games and stuff too. But the game development just comes out of the pure passion of wanting to make games. And that one sort of, I just realized I know so many things about RPG Maker. Even though I've never released an RPG Maker game, I decided to just do little tutorials on that, and that started growing, and eventually I'm going to start going into Unreal Engine as well. But when it comes to using my channel to promote my game development, that's where I'm kind of in a niche, because I've found over time that if I am not talking about survival horror, my audience does not care. They do not want to hear it. Like, it means nothing to them. So it's kind of like, yes, but
Yeah, something I'm curious to pick your brain on just a little bit in the future is how much that niche audience, felt like you converted and stuff. So I definitely want to dive into that. Getting more just a little bit about you. Where does this love of horror games come from?
I don't know. I've always loved horror. The earliest I can remember being genuinely scared by a game was when Silent Hill 1 for the PS1 came out. I literally couldn't play that game if the sun had gone down because I'd get so scared I couldn't sleep. But I wanted to go back to it, and it was like kind of like a roller coaster, like where it's really scary, but I know I'm not actually in danger, but I want to see more. And it's just like this morbid fascination. And that's kind of why I gravitated more towards Resident Evil than because Resident Evil is kind of more like action, fun, B movie horror instead of like Silent Hill, which is just like terrifying.
Yeah, I am not a horror dev. I'm a little bit of a wimp, but it's definitely like a huge portion of the gaming audience. And, people like Chris Zukowski will say everyone should make a horror game because, it's accessible and maybe because their one-time experience is as good for the dev side. At what point did you decide to try game dev? Like, were you already full-time YouTube and kind of putting out these sort of video essay style stuff, or has it just like always been an interest? Where did that come in?
So when I played like Tomb Raider or Resident Evil 2 or any of those games back on the PS1 that had the full motion video, like the pre-rendered graphics, instantly, that was my dream. It was really just to make the graphics, but it was to develop games. And that was back when you needed like a $50,000 supercomputer to be able to do that. So telling people you wanted to make video games in the 90s was kind of like telling them you wanted to be an astronaut, where they're just like, oh, okay, is there anything else you want to do? And I never stopped pursuing it. So when it was time to go to college, I actually just took a year off and didn't apply to any colleges because I was like, if I'm going to get a degree, it's going to be something I want. And then I went to school for game development. And I started out focusing on graphics and 3D because that's what I wanted to do. But my professors actually steered me towards game design, and it turns out that that was my main strength. Even though I am a decent 3D artist, I'm not a very good programmer. But my strength was game design. So my teachers all told me to focus on that, which is a lesson for anyone watching this. Just because something isn't your main passion, you could still be really good at it, and you should know what you're good at and what you're bad at because those are really important things to be aware of.
Yeah, would you say that the graphics and 3D art is the passion side for game dev for you? For which part of game dev is your favorite?
Well, I've actually really come to love game design because, like, for example, I'll see a lot of really competent programmers who know how to program, but they are missing something. Like the game feel isn't there, and it's like everything works, but it's not really an enjoyable experience. And that's where kind of having a little bit of the art side comes into game design because game design flows into everything. It's your UI and UX, it's your game feel, it's your graphics, like and obviously the game mechanics and all that. Everything has to work together. Everything has to be like systems that complement each other, and that's what makes or breaks. Yeah, you'll have games in the same genre, and some of them are fun and some of them are not. And I guarantee you, if you really study why, it's usually because of the game feel.
Yeah, this is super interesting because there's just one thing that I'm learning is that there's so many correct or not correct. There's so many paths to success and to releasing games on Steam. Like I didn't actually know that you went to university for game dev school. So I'm curious now, post education, did you get a whole degree in it? And when you compare yourself to, I feel like a lot of at least the game dev YouTube community is more like self-starter. I learned this after I got a degree. Are you pretty happy with your degree and all the stuff you learned, or how are you feeling about it?
I'm actually considering, I've been considering making this video for years, but I feel like it's a very big responsibility and I don't want to get in trouble for saying the wrong thing. But that video idea is to talk about how I kind of regret going to art school, mainly because of the financial aspects. I did get my degree, I graduated, I got a bachelor's in video game art and design from the Art Institute of Phoenix, which is now bankrupt for corrupt practices. And I graduated with $70,000 in student debt and no job offers.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of skills when I graduated. I knew how to do 3D art, and that was pretty much it. And, that was back then when maybe I could have gotten a job off of that. But nowadays, I mean, the bar is so high. You basically have to be releasing your own games if you want companies to even look at you, to the point that I'm not even interested in working for a company because the way that AAA and all that has gone, like I would recommend anybody out there to either be a solo dev or work with a small team and just do it yourself because then you get to make all the rules. You don't have to make these horrible DLC microtransaction games and all that stuff. But I was in a lucky situation where even though I went to a bad school, I had really good teachers. My main professor in game design was Steve Swink, who actually, I don't have it within reach, but I just bought his book finally. It's called Game Feel, and he was a really big game designer during the 2000s. Like he worked on a lot of the Tony Hawk games and all that stuff, and he's really really good. He's given GDC talks and the whole thing, and he was the one who really pushed me to do game design. So I feel like if I hadn't had professors like him, I don't think I'd have any good skills, and it's a real crapshoot gamble to go to school for game development. I personally don't think you need to go to formal education. I would highly recommend instead taking online courses, or, because those are expensive, or at least they seem expensive, because like there'll be a full animation course, for example, that's like $2,500. But if you went to traditional university, you'd be spending way more than that. So, you know,
Yeah, well, first off, sorry that that was, how your college experience went. It's sadly a little bit of a common story in all of higher ed, really. Like, this is a time when degrees are sadly getting less valuable than they were maybe 20 years ago. So, yeah, people just have to be, it's hard when you're so young to have the context, but it's a thing a lot of people experience. Shout out Professor Fink, did you say? Sounds like he was the real MVP. I feel like I've heard of that book actually. I haven't read it, but I do feel like I've heard of that one. Um,
uh, I
yeah,
don't know where it is. It's got a very recognizable cover. It's like one of the go-to books if you want to learn game design.
yep,
But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. That you were more focused on art at school. Did they dive into programming at all, or was the idea more in your uh course or your program that you would just be a dedicated artist?
they kind of started dividing people as the school, like, every year, people would kind of be put into groups. So some people would be kind of half artist, half programmer. So they would be like, okay, you're going to be a technical artist. And then people like me, where they're like, okay, you can do 3D art, but you're really good at game design. So you'll be a designer. And then, some people are just straight into programming, but it was primarily an art school. We were using UDK, which was before Unreal Engine 4. And I do remember for my senior project, we had to do like just a cutscene, but that was before blueprints or any of that stuff, like where there
Oh,
was no visual coding. And to this day, I don't even remember how I did it. All I remember is that I did like a street of like Raccoon City, because of course.
yeah. So at what point did you start your gaming YouTube channel in the middle of college? Did you do it after? How long have you been on
Oh,
YouTube?
no, my game dev channel was literally like just a couple years ago.
Nice.
But my Ink Ribbon channel, my main uh I talk about video games, has been, actually, I just hit my 10-year anniversary, which is crazy.
Congrats. Yeah, that's exciting. And then how did
Wow.
your content for the main channel, you've done so much content on horror specifically. How much do you think needing to take that lens of not exactly like a critic, but like you're making content more than just enjoying it. Do you think putting your brain in that space impacted your development of 100 Doors at all?
Uh, oh, definitely. I mean, there's a ton of like Easter eggs and references that only, gamers would understand from like, different franchises and different pop culture stuff or whatever. But it's not really the game that I wanted to make. If it was up to me, I'd be making nothing but survival horror games. But it's very, very difficult, I've learned. So baby steps.
Yeah, I mean, the game dev journey is like kind of like slow and long and like, milestones that maybe to just a gamer that feel like, "Oh, that's not that big a deal. They made a small game." It's like a huge amount of progress you've made. Now, I mean, speaking of progress and learning, the video that you posted that actually like put you in my feed was the one where you said, "I followed every piece of game dev advice," which I just think is first off a really clever idea for a video because there's so much advice around game dev, but also like I think if people are on game dev YouTube for very long, you do know like the conventional wisdom. And so I think there were several things I want to ask you about a couple of them, but just to start, when making that video, was there any particular piece of advice that you found either particularly helpful or that you were like, that kind of felt worthless?
Honestly, it was kind of like everything really added up, because it was a lot of little bits of advice that, when combined, became like super, super important. Like, for example, setting a deadline, or like, avoiding scope creep. That's probably, like, honestly the biggest one. And you hear that all the time, but it's so true. It's so easy to just be excited and you want to add this to your game and add that. So what I have found, and this is what I did for this game, I in my Trello board or whatever you use to organize, I made a list of like, here's all the mechanics that this game is going to have, and that is it. I will not add any more, period, end of sentence. And these can be kind of general. So example, like there's, flipping a switch or pulling a lever or whatever. Those are all the same thing. That's just like an interaction with a thing that does a thing. And it's like, okay, that's a mechanic. Like you can do so many things with that. And that's where you have to also kind of expand. This is where the game design comes in. You have to expand your imagination and be like, I could push a button or I could pull a lever or I could, flip a switch or I could like turn a valve. All of those are the same thing. It's just in a different packaging. But, the result of that could be anything. You could open a door, you could kill a character, you could blow up a house, you could do whatever. And that's where you want to get the most out of your mechanics because you only have to program that once and then whatever it triggers, it's just going to, and then you can use it across your entire game and it makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah, it's like this idea that like constraint breeds creativity. So it's reminding me of like a tangential thing, but I'm a big Magic the Gathering fan, which is a trading card game. And
Yeah.
there's this idea whenever you're setting out to build a deck, if it's like a casual deck, that it can be fun to like limit yourself to certain things. And so you might say, okay, I'm gonna do only only elves. I'm not going to put a single thing in. There's a bunch of stuff that's really strong and really powerful that would fit technically, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just put elves, or I'm going to do only cards under $1. And so that restraint actually sometimes I find whenever I'm making a magic deck actually creates like a fun puzzle within the normal puzzle anyway. And it's kind of reminding me of that idea within game dev. So what I'm hearing you say is that you sort of like put like guardrails up on what you were going to do in your game, and then you just made yourself color inside those lines. Did that, and then that will lead to like other cool creative things. Is that what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, and that idea is something that I've gotten comfortable as a workflow because I'm not a good programmer and I'm trying to rely less on them and improve my programming, but I rely on templates a lot and I've used a lot of templates. Of course, I've never finished any game that started with a template, but what I do is I'm like, okay, I don't know how to make these systems. Here's this template. It has these features and that's it. I don't know how to add more. I don't know how to change them. So I'm just going to have to get the most out of these mechanics that I can and try to make something cool with the tools that I've been given. And then when you start making your own, it's like you have to kind of adhere to that and continue that discipline because otherwise scope creep.
Yeah, I think the part we have to be disciplined against is just that even for the most novice game devs, maybe even more so, is that you just constantly are like spinning out new ideas of things that could go in a game. I feel like I've even done this before I even knew anything about programming. Like it's just part of it is that it's fun to like I like ideate on ideas. But did you have anything else like how did you actually was it the Trello board that you turned to whenever you had an idea and kind of put into it, or was it just the discipline of like, no, I'm finishing this game? Like, what was it that actually helped you maybe either not just spiral into a million ideas, or how did you actually filter yourself and not put those things into the game?
This is a really important lesson that I learned, and this is something that helped me. If I hadn't done this one step, I don't think I have released my game yet, if at all. Um, I I stopped myself and I was like, okay, how long is it taking me to make every level and everything? And when I added up how much time it was taking, if I had continued, you know, obsessing over like, oh, I want to make this room look like this and I'm gonna do this from scratch and da 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 da, it would have taken me years to
Yeah.
make this game. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, no, we're not doing that. And immediately I set a deadline. I was like, I am going to finish this game within this much time. And all of a sudden, everything just snapped into place. And what I was doing is I was imagining I was working for another company and
Yeah.
they said the game has to be out by this time. And all of a sudden I'm on crunch time, even though it's self-imposed. And that got me to just go, 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 go. And there was times where I was like, I really don't like the way this looks, but whatever, move on. And I just kept going. And the idea behind that was it was like make it first and then fix it later. Not the mechanics, but like the graphics. Like there's like sometimes like weird shadow renders or I would just put a placeholder like square cube for like a table that I was gonna, add later or whatever. And I had everything on a checklist, and I would just go through, and every day I would just try to get as much of it done. And that's what ended up making the game get finished very quickly. Like progress just skyrocketed.
Yeah, that's a super smart, like, little, like, trick to play on yourself because, I mean, we've just seen it time and time again, like, people, will post a video that they're making a game, and then 5 years later, they're still working on it, they're perfecting every little thing, and so that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense that setting that
And
deadline
on
helps.
that note, something that I want to tell other game devs is your final game. Like I learned this from I was watching a behind the scenes video of something, and it was like a PS2 game that they had made, and they were like, we had so many other ideas, but we just had to cut everything because the game had to come out. And I was just like, oh my God, we can just be like, oh well, can't include that, no time. And that's what I started doing. I was just like, there was so many things I wanted to add to my game, but there was just not time. And I just kept telling myself, nope, there's no time for that. Move on.
Yeah, that's genius. I love that idea. Yeah, I think the first piece of advice that you talked about in that video, going back to your advice video, was make something small. How long did you actually end up spending on 100 Doors?
It was almost exactly 6 months of development from start to finish.
Yeah, well done. That's actually pretty fast, honestly. Did that feel like a fast experience, or what was that like for you?
Well, the first couple of months didn't feel fast because that's where I was just making like the mechanics and trying to like not prototype because I had kind of already prototyped at that point, but I was just like figuring stuff out. And then once I got the flow of like how things are going and organized all my files, then it was just like going to work every day, and just you get it done. And then, so this is what I have it right here. I have a to-do list, and I write down like 3 things in my game that I wanna get done today, and if I check them all off, I have had, uh, progress in game development, and depending on how much time I have that day or if I have other stuff to do, I can do more or I can do less, but I find it really, really nice 'cause, it's kinda like a video game where you, like, check off, like, objectives,
Right.
it's like, "Oh, I did that. Objective complete."
Yep. Yeah, you're showing off some super just like tangible advice that people can pull in, which I think is really helpful. So I hope people's ears are opening. You mentioned prototyping. I'm in a season where I'm really trying to figure out prototyping, and it's really just got my head in a knot because I just finished talking to Ponty Pants, who didn't do any prototyping at all. Basically, just had an idea and did it, and was super successful. Um, but then I've talked to other developers that like prototyping, they feel like it's essential. What did your prototyping phase look like for you?
So this was my first time doing a true like prototype, and literally I just had my 3 mechanics where it was interact with something and then go through a door that would lead you to the next area, and the doors are randomized, and that was it. And once I got that working, I mean that it was very simple. That was the prototype. But you don't always need a prototype in my opinion. Like for example, if you're making a game that is already a very well established genre and you know how it works and you're kind of just making a clone of it, then just make it. Like you know how it works. Although you should write down every mechanic because sometimes it's deceptive. You think something's simple and then when you break it down, it's like, oh, this is actually really, complicated to set up. But
Yeah, I love that idea of writing down every mechanic. That seems like helpful to just put it on a page, kind of gives you the step back of like what you're actually going to have to build. I think that's super helpful. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've just been curious about prototyping. Um, Shifting gears just a little bit, how much do you think, you kind of dabbled in this a little bit earlier, but how much do you think your main channel helped promote this game? Did you see much traction when you like talked about it or posted a trailer or anything?
um I think I definitely did, but I'm really bad at promoting myself, so I didn't do much to promote it. I'm still trying to work on that, but I got about 1,300 wish lists within 2 months from when I put the first trailer up, and then I put a second trailer up, and I would talk about it on my live streams now and then. Um, and that ended up converting to right now it's like around 330 sales. So, the wish lists are still there, but it didn't really do that much for me. However, this is what I was talking about earlier. I guarantee you, if I had released a survival horror game, the numbers would be very, very different. Not just because it's a survival horror game, but because that's what my audience focuses on. Because 100 Doors is just like, it's a liminal walking space kind of game. It's not anything special. And I understand that that's not a game for a lot of people. I tried to make it as entertaining as possible, but I get it, you know? So it's kind of like, I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see until I release something bigger to really gauge that. I wanted to see what would happen, and it didn't really do that much. But I don't know. Some people might think that that's a huge advantage or bigger numbers. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
My
like I
first
said,
game.
I'm not really big into the horror scene, so I don't really know the lingo. Can you tell me some of the main differences between a liminal space game and a true survival horror? And what would that look like in terms of developing? Like, is it just that a survival horror is like a lot more, or kind of what are the differences in those two things?
Well, survival horror involves a lot of like finding keys to open doors and sort of like a breadcrumb trail to, get to the next area. And you have to kill all the enemies, but you're also managing your health and your resources. Like, if you go down this hallway and there's three enemies, they might hurt you and you only have one health item. So it's like, and it creates a lot of like that tension. Whereas something that's like a liminal type of game like mine, it's sort of more experiential where you just walk around and look at stuff and you're like, whoa. Because the whole liminal thing is it just gives you a feeling of unease and it's like a lot of empty hallways.
Right.
So I was kind of aiming more for that. I was there's a PS1 game called LSD Simulator. Which is just like it's kind of like my game where it's just a bunch of random rooms and nothing makes any sense and it's really weird, but it was a little too abstract. So I was trying to, bring it in and hyper focus on like one type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for you, 100 Doors, the liminal space game took 6 months. If you were going to make a survival horror game that you think was about the same quality, could you do it in 6 months? Or is that game, because it sounds like there's maybe more design and maybe more like even balancing, but also, could you make a really small version of that? Or is it just more challenging? Or why did you go the liminal space route kind of?
Well, the liminal space thing was just because it's what I'm capable of programming wise. If programming wasn't a hurdle and I wanted to make a survival horror game, see, the thing is, I could make a functioning game from beginning to end, probably if I worked just as hard in maybe the same amount of time. But uh, as a designer and a storyteller, that's where when you try to introduce characters and stories and lore and all of that stuff, and then you want to do like voice acting and cutscenes, that like essentially doubles your development time. You don't think it's going to take that much work, but it's so much work to add just story elements like that. Even just cutscenes and animations and all that, it takes so much time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I actually have a couple questions later, kind of on a little bit of that scope for 100 Doors. So we'll definitely put a pin in that and circle back.
Okay.
Yeah, now just kind of reflecting on your experience of this game. It's your first game. You spent 6 months on it. Got about 330 sales. It is also reviewing very positively. I just checked yesterday. It has 21 reviews, and it's at positive. How are you feeling about the success of the game? Do you consider this
Wait, you
game?
checked it yesterday?
Yeah.
Oh, it went up. It dropped down to mostly positive, and I was like really sad about it because I was just like, oh man, but that's good to know.
Yeah, yeah. So but anyway, yeah, it's sitting at positive 21 reviews. Do you consider this game a success?
Yes, because my main goal was to, well, one, have a positive reception, but my main goal was to just release a game because as any game developer knows, it's so easy to just keep working on stuff, get bored with it, move on to a different project, or like have a problem and you have to cancel a game and start working on something else and you never release anything. I've been doing that for the past like, I don't know, 6 years, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I was like, I'm just gonna release a damn game. And I did it. So just by that metric, I consider it a success. Obviously, I would love to release something bigger and better, but it, it's it helped me improve so much that like I consider that the real success because now um there's a weird thing that happens when have you released a game?
Sort of. I've released, maybe you could call it more of a tech demo on Steam. So I would say not quite,
Okay.
like it's not something that I would really consider a full game experience. But I've put something on Steam. So sort of halfway there, maybe we could say.
Okay, well, I don't know if you well, because this is gonna be in my part 2 follow-up, once all my numbers come in, but I don't know if you had this, but I had a very strange, intense, unexpected emotional reaction in multiple ways to releasing a game. On one hand, I was very proud. I was like, "Oh my god, I did it," and it was like accomplishment. But then I kind of all of a sudden, imagine you're a manager at Chili's. I don't know. And one day you show up to work and they're like, "No, you did it. You're done. You completed." And you're like, "Wait, what do you mean I'm done?" And that's how I felt, where I was just like, "What do you mean I'm done?" And I sat here going crazy because I was like, "I don't know what to do with myself." Like, I've been working on this every day for 6 months, and now it's done, and I don't know what to do, and I'm going crazy. And, and then seeing the numbers come in and people, like, playing it and people liking it or hating it, and it's just like, it's actually very overwhelming, and I wasn't, prepared for that. So if you release a game, just know that you're gonna go through all sorts of emotional roller coasters.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way that you just described that. I've heard about post-release blues, but what you're describing is something a little bit even more specific. So I want to hear a little bit more about this. But as I'm thinking about it, our society is not set up to have projects really. Like most of our jobs, not all of them. I think if you're like, if maybe this would be more normal if you're in maybe like a contracting space or like, like more like physical labor. But even then, there's always like an infinite amount of projects. So we don't have a lot of things in our society where you're working on something for months or years and then it's over. How did you cope with that? Did it just eventually kind of settle in, or did you find anything helped with that?
Um, I decided to take a break from game dev. It was gonna be for a couple months. I'm already working on my next game because I couldn't take it anymore after about 2 weeks. I was just going so crazy, and, I also love to do game development, so I was just like, "Okay, I'm ready to get back into it." Um, but it's very weird because sometimes it felt like my example, like, if you're, like, a mailman and they tell you you've delivered all the
Yeah.
mail, you're done, and you're like, "What?" Like, I don't understand. But then sometimes it kind of felt you had a pet and now your pet, is dead and you don't have to feed it anymore, you
Mhm.
know? And it's like, it's sad, but it's also like a relief. It's weird. It's really hard to explain. I'm still trying to put words to it. It's a very unique experience.
Yeah, that pet example is apt, I think, probably because it's like that you don't have the same level of responsibility to a game, but once you've committed to it, you kind of do. Like there's a sort of responsibility to yourself that maybe doesn't have pressure, but there's this like internal thing of like, I need to do this. I've committed to doing this. I'm doing this all the time. And then when you don't have that, you're getting time back, you're getting mental space back. And so, yeah, I think that this sense of relief makes a lot of sense for me. Something I've heard other developers that maybe it's more for games that take a little longer, but also maybe not, is that they get to a point in development and maybe it's just a season, like maybe middle until near the end, where they sort of hate the game and they like almost despise working on it. Did you ever feel that too?
Oh yeah, and I for every project that I've ever worked on, and that's something that you have to learn how to get over because you will hate your game. And on top of that, you're gonna run into multiple problems. Not only is your game gonna look like crap, it's gonna feel like the worst game ever made, but think about it. Imagine watching the same movie every single day for months and months and months. Eventually, you're gonna start noticing like, oh, you can see the cameraman in that reflection, or like that actor like messed up on that part or whatever. And eventually you're going to be sick of this movie and you don't want anything to do with it. It's the same for your game. And on top of that, you aren't going to see problems that are obvious, which is why playtesting is very, very important. Get someone who has never seen your game to play it and just sit behind them, and you'll immediately be like, oh, they're doing everything wrong. I need to like fix this. And the earlier the better, because then you have less to fix. Um, but going back to something you said that I just want to mention real quick, you used the word responsibility. And this is something I think every game developer should be having in the back of their head is as a game dev, you have a responsibility to produce something good. Even if it's niche and it's not for everyone, the people that it is for, it needs to be a good game, because we have so many bad games, from like greedy AAA all the way down to shovelware. You don't want to be on either ends of those spectrums. And remember, at the end of the day, you're making this game for players to play, and you need to put yourself in their shoes, because if they're spending their hard-earned money on your game, you should be bringing them value and entertainment, because that's what these are. It's, to escape your day when you're stressed and all that. So responsibility is something that game developers have. And I know that sounds like too serious, but it kind of is.
Yeah, no, I really like that framework, and it's nice because the indie game space has showed us that good doesn't have to mean, you know, perfect 3D graphics. It's not that. It's an experience that respects the player, and that can mean a lot of things. And it's when you put your heart and soul into it, even if you're not a very good artist or not a very good programmer, there's ways you can do that. And a lot of it comes down to the energy and effort you're putting in. And like you said, putting yourself in their shoes is such a huge part of that. But I think that's really good advice, or just a good word for the community. Let's respect the players. We need them. They're important. Let's care about them.
Well,
Last
and you have got a reputation too, not just with the gamers, but with fellow game developers, because the indie dev circle is a lot smaller than people realize. And if you are doing nefarious stuff or releasing crap, people are not going to want to work with you. They're going to know, because they will look you up.
Yep. Yeah, well, and there is something that I just realized. So I just posted an interview with the creator of this game called Dice with Death, and they did early access, and it did really
Mhm.
well. But it made me realize that, like, we as a gaming community are really suspicious of early access, and it's because of bad actors. Like, there's been a
Yeah.
bunch of like high level, like brought in maybe even millions of dollars on Kickstarters and things of games that didn't exist. And so, like, I don't know that a small creator doesn't have that much pull, but it does matter, right? Like, there is a sort of communal idea. There's a communal thing that you're participating in, and I think just acknowledging that, and you don't have to put a ton of pressure on yourself of like, I have to do it perfect, but just acknowledging like, I'm a part of a small community, and what I put out makes some sort of impact on that. That's important. Yeah.
And one note about that I would recommend to people, because I kind of have like this fear of releasing in early access. Like, people are going to judge me or hate it, or it's going to seem, like you said, nefarious, because it's
Mhm.
gotten a really bad rap. What I would recommend instead is do the Stardew Valley method, where because gamers will really appreciate this. Have a roadmap, like,
Yep.
maybe you have scope creep and there's so much stuff that you can add, you just don't have the time. So save it for, like, versions down the road, and release them as free updates.
Yeah.
Because then people don't know it's coming, and they've got that game sitting in their Steam library, and then it's like, hey, we just released an update. Here's all the new features. And people will be like, oh my God. And then people are not only playing your game again, but, maybe they'll tell their friends about it. And then you have this like slowly growing positive reputation, because you're giving players more for something they already paid for. And that is always a good thing. Like, I just think that, like, people don't realize how much value you can get and how many sales you can get from doing stuff like that. But anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a great word. Yeah, I'm back in on early access being sometimes a viable option. I do think a couple notes from that video are: number one, you do have to release. Full game is not the right word, but you do have to release an actual game. Like, in this case, I think they had a roguelike with like two characters they launched at. It was a full game. Like, imagine if Slay the Spire released with two characters instead of four. Though you can't release like 50% of your game, but sometimes, like especially in the roguelike genre, it works. Or if you were going to do a story game, I think you could do like chapter one could work. But anyway, I'm back in on there being viable ways, but I think it all circles back, though, to doing it well, to just that responsibility to the gamer. Put yourself in their shoes. Early access is the space for people that are believing that you're going to do more, to just support you to do it, but you have to respect them and give them something immediately too. So anyway, it's a really fun topic.
Yeah. And early access is really stressful too, because that's the thing, is people are paying money because they believe in you and they're counting on you, and you can't disappoint them. And then it's like, oh my God,
Yep,
like, I have to get this done, and it has to
yep.
be good.
Yeah, I don't think I would do it, but I'm open to the idea now. So, well, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. But anyway, um, Final question, circling back to this video you posted about all the game dev advice. Um, After this whole project, what is your most lasting piece of advice that you think would be, of all the things, the most helpful to someone that is sitting in your shoes 9 months ago, or whenever you started, that they know they want to make a game, basically they have the skills, but they just haven't done it yet. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give them?
I know that you want to make the big, giant, amazing game that you have your idea for, but just like you didn't, start sprinting and jumping when you were like a baby, you have to learn how to crawl before you learn how to walk, before you learn how to run. So that's where you want to take whatever current skills you have, and if they're not good enough, then improve them, whether it's tutorials or even AI teaching you how to game dev, teaching you, not doing it for you. Then take the skills you currently have and make a list of games that you can make and find a way to make those games special and unique and your own, and don't expect them to be huge hits. Instead, expect them to make a little bit of money, and the real value is improving your skills, because no matter how small of a game you think you're going to make, you're going to learn a lot from it, especially if you release it, because releasing a game is a whole skill on its own. And then continue, you know, think of like levels of game dev, and now your next game can be a little bit bigger and then a little bit bigger, and as you build those skills, eventually you're going to have nice passive income, but eventually you're also going to get to the point that you have the skills to make the game that you actually wanted to make. You just have to be patient. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, that's a good word. How much did you actually use AI in your development? Because I think the big fear, when I released that first little tech demo, I did rely on AI a lot for coding. And when I go back to it, I'm going to do exactly what you said. I'm not going to let it write anything, but I will let it check something or debug something to kind of help me. But how did you do that, especially as, a non-programmer, where it can be tempting to just say, make this code go?
So I use Unreal Engine blueprints, which is visual scripting. So I couldn't have the AI write the code even if I wanted to, but I
Helps.
wouldn't do that because that doesn't teach you anything. And also the biggest thing about that is if it breaks, you don't know how to fix it. And that's something you don't want to be in, because I will tell you, people found bugs in my game immediately. I had to create a save system out of magic the day that the game released, because I thought it didn't need one. It turns out it really did. And that's where I would open AI and I would tell it, you know, how do I do this? Break down the steps. And sometimes I'll literally tell it, explain it to me like I'm a child. And sometimes it's insultingly simple the way it explains it. They're like, okay, imagine people on a train. I'm like, okay. But it helped. It worked. And I drastically improved my skills. And I know a lot of people hate AI, but in my opinion, this is one of the uses of it that is really, really beneficial, because I can ask it very specific questions, or I can give it a full prompt of like, I want to make this system. It should function like this. You can even put a screenshot of what you want it to look like, if you can do like a mock-up, and tell it very, very specifically what you want, and it will give you instructions. However, be careful with that, because it sometimes will lie to you very confidently, and it'll just make you create a huge mess. Um, if anyone's going to do that, what I would recommend, I tried to do an inventory system multiple times under both Gemini and ChatGPT, and neither of them knew what the hell they were talking about. So what I learned is if you're having a complicated mechanic, you need to break it down into steps. So for example, with an inventory system, instead of how do I make an inventory system, how do I pick up an object and store it in an array? And then how do I make that array show an icon in an inventory slot? And then like little steps like that. But the thing is, now I know how to do this stuff. I can do stuff without even looking it up. And that's like magic, because I couldn't do that before. And when you use it as a tool, it's kind of like it'll just create a personal tutorial for whatever you want if you can't find one, which there's a tutorial, you should probably try to find it. But yeah, that's the extent of AI. I didn't actually put AI into my game, but I did use it to help me code, and I will continue to do so. On that note, though, I also want to mention I have an LLM locally installed on my computer that I can use even if my internet goes out. And I would recommend that to anyone, because on one hand, you don't have to pay for anything, and also it's like weirdly uncensored. Because sometimes you want to ask about guns and stuff, and it'll be like, I'm sorry, that's violent. And it's like, ugh. but also you're not wasting water and data centers and the environment and blah blah blah.
I didn't actually know that was possible because with AI, I think it's important we start to have nuanced conversations about it because there's a lot of reasons it's bad, but there's also a lot of things it can help with. So, like the environmental piece is something I still haven't decided for myself if I were to just not use any of them. So, installing them, that's actually a great idea because that is the concern. Like that matters, to a lot of people, and so I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's not that hard, and you can do it on even like a laptop. It doesn't require that much. And the thing you have to keep in mind is you're not gonna have like the latest new model or whatever, but it will work and it will teach you. I've tested it because I wanted to see. I was like, can it actually teach me stuff? So I just told it like how to make a interaction interface, where you can like interact with things. And it did it. It was very standard.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it also actually surprisingly solves another problem I've been learning about with AI from I just listen to these conversations. I'm not actively developing anything right now, but if AI, in version 5.0 knows of this way to solve this problem you have, and then, you build it, and then 3 months later, they've updated to 6.0, and now the AI has a different way to solve that same problem. If you go back to try to fix it, it might try to fix it the new way, and it just is not compatible. It opens yourself up to all sorts of mess. Like you talked about needing to immediately be able to fix bugs and yeah, so I think the way I'm thinking about AI, if I was to start developing today, I would use it somewhat similarly to how you're saying, in that a teaching tool, but I would not have any pipeline from an LLM to my game. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't copy and paste anything into my game code wise. I think art for sure is too dubious to put it in the game, but I would personally use it to be like, yeah, break down a problem or, here's my code. Is there any way that I could optimize this better? Give me some tips, and then I would write it. So, yeah, I think that was a fun little side tangent because it's an important thing for developers to think about. Like, it's here, but AI is too broad. So we need to have like conversations where we're talking about it and trying to figure this thing out
Yeah.
together. So, yeah, I'm with you though.
And
Makes a lot of sense.
like the simple rule that I have is never have AI just do it for you. Have it like use it as a tool.
Yeah.
Anything that will speed up a process that you already know how to do, and honestly, as a teaching tool, it's amazing. Like you with no experience could sit down and, say, okay, I have just opened blah blah game engine. I want to make this type of game, where do I start? What should I do? And then you can even tell it, please explain it to me in very simple terms. I'm a beginner programmer. And you have to just, the more specific you are with your prompt, the more helpful it will be because it's a fancy calculator. People think that it's like got a personality. It's not. It's just a fancy calculator that uses words and it can do wonders. And another thing I'll tell you is I know so many indie game developers and animators and people who are working on all sorts of stuff, and nobody's talking about it, but everybody is using AI for something. And the reason no one's talking about it is because everyone has these visceral reactions where they just start hissing and spitting at the mention of AI. And it's like, well, hold on, not all AI, like you said, is the same. If someone's just like, make me a game, then yeah, that's slop and that doesn't bring any value into the world. But for me, I know how to do so much more programming stuff now that I think that is value. So it just really depends on how you use it and all that. But unfortunately, we're just not ready as a society, I guess, to talk about it. And especially don't use, I see so many Steam capsules and artwork where it's so obviously AI. Like, please don't do that. Like
Yeah.
everybody knows. You think you're getting away with it and you're not. And if you don't care, you should, because like I said, the game dev community is very small and people will be like, "Oh, that's one of those weird AI
Yep.
people," and they will not want to work with you and they will not respect you.
Yep. Yeah. Uh, I'm pretty into the AI topic right now. For anyone that wants some motivation of the importance of not using it for art specifically, Brandon Sanderson, the author, has a talk on AI art, and it's really good. So I won't spoil the talk. It's really good. It aligns with what I think about using AI art really well. And then last thing, because I'm a little bit of a nerd about this, but yeah, like you said, everybody's using it in some way. and I was listening to a Sam Altman interview, and he kind of outlined this like in his doomsday principles. And the one he mentioned that is actually, I think, the most like possible just for society is that it won't, like, take over the world in the sci-fi sense, like, it's not gonna become sentient or something, but if, like, every person in the world is using it, like, I saw we had some, like it was either, like, an FBI top official or something post, like, a thing that they were using, and it's like, if it just becomes the thing that every human is offloading their thinking to, then it's like our whole society is run by the thinking of AI, which is a little scary. So we need to start talking about it.
Yeah.
Like even silly little conversations about this is providing a little bit of nuance for us to talk about the different things that AI means, and it's kind of important. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I just find it such a fascinating topic, and it's nice that it has such practical, real applications for game dev that we actually know what we're talking about. Like we have a common language around it. So yeah, thanks for jumping on that that side road with me. That was fun. I do want to transition just a little bit to talking about some design, about 100 Doors. So you're a designer by trade, so this would be really fun. To start, 100 Doors is a super ambitious title because my understanding of the game is that each door is a different like level for the game essentially, and they're all hand designed. So did having the name 100 Doors slash 100 levels, did that pose any problems for you?
I regretted it almost immediately, and if I could go back in time, I would have called it 50 doors or maybe even less, because I didn't think about how many, 3D assets I would have to make and how many it's really hard because I had a list and I numbered it from, 1 through 100, and I was like, "Okay, time to come up with 100 unique ideas for rooms," and very quickly, I was like, I have no and they also had to adhere to, like, the simple mechanics. I had crazy stuff planned, and I had to simplify everything, like, some rooms ended up just being, like, kind of a nothing burger when they were supposed to be, like, this huge thing, and it was just because I just didn't have the time or the skill to do it. So, keep your scope in mind when you are thinking of your ideas because sometimes you're biting off more than you can chew without realizing. That's what happened to me.
Yeah, do people see all 100 levels when they play the game, or is there any randomness to it?
They're all there, but they are randomized.
Mm. So how many do they actually play through on an average playthrough? Do they see 20 rooms or
If they don't die, they can make it all the way through. Like,
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
that's the game is your goal is to get through, all 100 doors, and then there's, like, skulls to collect to get, like, the true ending, which a lot of people were not happy about that because like, there's someone who completed the game and left a negative review because they missed 1 skull, and they're like, "I'm not gonna play that again." Like, ugh. I'm just like, "Okay. I worked
Yeah,
really hard on the true ending, but okay."
yeah, that's a bummer. Did you have to make any cuts in other places to fulfill making 100 rooms?
Yeah, I actually had a whole story planned with cutscenes and characters, and I just cut it all. One day, I just realized it was going to add so much, like I said, the animating and the cutscenes and all that, and I just cut it all out. I looked at it and I was like, does this story or does this game really need a story? Does all this have to be here? Is it really adding anything? And obviously, it added a little value, but it really wasn't adding enough to justify the amount of work I would have to put into it. So I cut it all out and simplified it completely.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, going back to our earlier conversation, that makes a lot of sense. Of just like making cuts, setting what you're going to make, and then sticking to it. So is each room, you mentioned you have this very basic mechanic of like interact with a button or a lever. So is what you do in each room, you just have to find like a button or a lever, or are there like puzzles in it, or how does the gameplay actually look like?
Um, it's kind of a mix, not it's kind of a mix all over the place because some rooms are, like, scary, some rooms are kind of funny, some are just weird, some are sort of, like, empty, but then some of them, you're literally just walking through a place and just being like, "Ooh," kinda like you're in a haunted house, that's sort of how a lot of them ended up being, but then there's some where you have to make, more choices, like, one room that took forever to make, is, you walk into a room and each door is labeled with one of the 7 deadly sins, and you have to pick whichever one is your, like, most guilty sin, and then you walk through it, and you can't go back once you go through there. and each one of those rooms is specifically designed to mess with someone who would choose that as their like weakness. But then I also had puzzle rooms. Like there's one that I'm really proud of, and I might even make a full game of this where it's you have to actually learn Spanish to solve a puzzle. And I thought that because that was sort of a prototype within my game, because that was a game idea I had, and I was like, let's just try it and see how that works. So I was able to sneak prototypes for a couple different ideas into rooms, and I was really proud of that one because I feel like there could be like a sort of horror game that can teach you a language at the same time. Like there's something there. I
Yeah.
have to figure that out. But then there's also like these ghosts that spawn, and you have to like, you know, you have to wait for them to drop flowers, and then you put the flowers on a mantle, and it will like send them to the spirit world and free them or whatever. But they'll take your health if they hit you, so they're sort of like enemies. I don't know. I just kind of kept throwing in spices, and seeing what would work and what didn't.
Yeah, I imagine one of the benefits of making 100 unique levels is that you get to maximize your learning because they don't all have to be exactly the same. So like you said, you can play around with little puzzles and little things. And so, yeah, maybe there's something to that, like, simulator style, that, liminal space walking simulator style where you can play around with as a beginner dev and learn a lot. So that's pretty cool. Where did you
It's an easy genre.
Yeah, it's super good. Where did you find inspiration for all these different levels? Did you come to a point where you're like, "I'm out of ideas?" That's a lot, 100.
Oh yeah. Um, I came up like immediately. I was just on fire. I came up with about 25 that were like, okay, cool, and those ended up being the more spectacular levels because they're the ones I started with. But then other stuff came from like real life things. Like I had an aquarium, and it got overrun by snails, and it became a nightmare. And then they started laying eggs, and it turned into this huge thing. So the first room that I created, there was just snails everywhere, and they're like slimy, and you can hear them, and it was just like ah. So there's stuff like that. There's also like some areas from video games that I recreated as sort of like an homage. Um, and then another thing that I did when I was really starting to run out of ideas is I started going through all, because I just, when I have a game idea, I write it down on like my Trello board. And I just started going through all of them and finding games that I wanted to make or game ideas that I have. And I'm like, how can I turn this into like a bite-sized
Clever.
piece of this
Yeah.
and get it to work? So like for that, an example is I had an idea for a horror game. You know when like it's dark and you see a coat rack and it looks like a person, and then you get close to it and you're like, oh, it's a coat rack. Well, that was the idea, but I was like, what if the player can't see, like they have like, Velma lost her glasses kind of thing, where everything is blurry until you get close to it. And I was glad that I did that as a level, because as a level it was fine, but a whole game of that would have just been awful.
Mm.
Like it wouldn't have worked, and it was like nauseating, so it was a really great way to test a lot of things that I've just like, okay, I'm removing that from my game idea list because that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's the ultra prototyping session. This is sounding awesome. I need to make a liminal space game. Um, would you say that the liminal space games, do they fit as a subcategory of horror, or do you think they're in something else?
Well, it's kind of hard because it wasn't until I saw a YouTube video of someone doing a playthrough, and they're the ones who called it liminal horror, which I had never referred
Mm.
to it as. I was just like, oh, because I thought of it as a walking simulator, because it's kind of more in line with that.
Gotcha.
But when they said that, I was like, oh, that's a great marketing word, liminal. I'll throw that in there. Um, but I could have easily made a game that took place in one level with like a beginning and an end, and maybe like a little bit of story here and there, and that would have taken me far less time to develop. So I would recommend that. And also, I don't recommend doing anything randomized, because randomizing my levels made it so difficult to test, because every time I'd walk into a level, I'm like, oh, this isn't the level I wanted, and I had to keep like looping through, and oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah, then just to pick your design brain on the horror space, because your main channel is around horror. What do you think are one or two things that make a horror game good?
Well, I like to think of horror like you're designing a haunted house, because it's really fun when you think of it that way. Because think of someone who you would love to jump scare, like when they're coming around a corner, you're like, "Rah!" and they scream. You get to do that to your players, and it kind of brings out a little bit of an evil side of you because you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna put this here, and when the player goes this way, they're gonna see this, and then they're gonna be like, nope." But when they turn around, that's when I scare them, and you can plan all that out, and it makes it really, really fun because when you get to see people play test your game and they react exactly like you knew they would, where they see the thing and they turn around and then they get scared, it's such a fun feeling, and that's always how horror should work. But there's also like just like a haunted house, there's I call it the ooh and the ah, and that's where like you're like walking around and you're seeing like, oh, there's like a dead body hanging from the ceiling, and ooh, there's spider webs, and it's something to look at, and maybe if there's spiders coming up, leaving the spider web is a nice little like, guess what you're in for, because then you want to keep the player guessing, like they don't know what's going on. And in my opinion, that's one of the easiest ways to design. That's why everyone recommends horror games, because it's actually really easy to scare people unless they're horror veterans and they don't get scared by anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think in your game design career moving forward, do you want to tackle a true horror game? Or are you going to dive into some other genre? Where are you leaning towards?
Right now I'm actually working on it's a survival horror themed shop simulator, which sounds
Ooh,
stupid, but
no, I like it.
um yeah, but just because I've been playing a bunch of different games, and I was like, I really like this genre. It's very relaxing, and I was like, how can I make this horror? So there's that. But like that's where you find fun little things to like add to take a genre that already exists and make it your own. Whether you can even add genres together. So like I'm gonna have zombies attack the shop, and you have to like defend your shop, or they'll destroy your stuff like that. But moving forward, my dream is to make survival horror games, but just even regular horror games would be fine too. I think I want to probably try that next, either after my current game or maybe before it. But like a true horror game, maybe just a first person one to keep it simple, where I just want someone to go from the beginning to the end and get terrified, as much as possible, because that'll be really flexing those horror muscles, and it'll be easier to market to my audience. But
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you do because, you have such a long history in the horror space as a YouTuber. One, I think, yeah, igniting your audience will be really cool and seeing what you've learned from this project. Also, yeah, the simulator space is just kind of popping. Like we've got, trading card game simulator and grocery store simulator. So I haven't personally seen anyone merge that with horror, but it sounds like just a genius idea. So I hope you're happy with how it's turning out, but it sounds really cool.
I want to kill myself. It's becoming a nightmare, and I'm probably gonna have to hire a programmer to help me. But thank you.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's a project you'll definitely finish, or is there a world where it doesn't work out and you have to let it go?
Well, the money that my horror game or 100 Doors have made, I'm saving it, and I'm planning on using it towards like if I have to hire a programmer to help me make something or whatever, because I know that game will perform probably a lot better. But I don't know, because again, you think something simple until you try to make it.
Yeah.
I mean, just being able to carry multiple items and then place multiple items on a shelf. I'm trying to figure it out, and even AI trying to help me is like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
so it's rough.
Yeah, programming's super hard, and yeah, I hope you find a realistic way to solve that. There be bringing on a partner. You mentioned maybe working on a team of two or three, or finding a collaborator because yeah, programming's tough, and especially when like yourself, you've got these other skills you can lean on, so you don't necessarily have to master programming to keep going. You mentioned maybe you'll make a horror game someday, like just a more of a classic one. Do you have an old school favorite or a favorite one that you would be inspired by?
I probably would have said Silent Hill, but I feel like that's been like so copied and overdone that I think I'd want to go into a different direction. Um, I don't know, like it depends, because there's two different types of horror. There's like genuine psychological terrifying horror that keeps you up at night, or there's like the jump scare like action horror, where it's like, oh, a monster, and you
Right.
shoot it and you're like, oh, I'm alive. and I still don't know which one I want to do, but I do know that I want the story to be good. And if anyone is making a game and they want to add a story, they want to add characters, keep all that documented somewhere. And like what I like to do in my free time is I'll develop characters. So I'll this is what the character's gonna look like, and I'll sketch them out and just kind of have like a rough idea. And then I will do a character sheet, like their name, their age, where they're from, what their hobbies are, a little bit of their backstory. And then I consider those like final OCs. And then I just put them in a list where it's like, here's all that. So when I go to make a game, I can go to that list of like, now it's like 20 or 30 characters. And I could be like, ooh, I want this character and I want this character because them two together would be like a really good, you know, yin yang kind of thing or whatever. And you can do so much like that. And it saves you a lot of work ahead of time. Plus, it's just fun to create. I know not everyone's into writing stories and characters or whatever, but I am.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to follow your journey. You bring a lot of unique talents that the average hobby dev is on the other side of the coin. You have game design and story writing, which isn't where a lot of people are drawn. So I'm super excited to follow along with your journey. And yeah, before I let you go, I'll ask you one question. And this is called the Dev Dream Podcast, and I made it to honestly inspire myself by talking to cool people like you, but also to inspire others. And you're a really important person to interview because you're 6 months ahead of where a lot of us want to be. You're not 10 years ahead. And so it's easier for us to imagine that we could do what you've done and follow your lead. But for you in this season, I'm curious, what would you say is your game dev dream in this season of life now that you have released a game?
When you say season of life, what do you mean?
Just where you're at
Right,
today,
just
like
right
just
now?
saying, yeah, not locking in, this is my dream for the rest of time, but just today, what is your game dev dream?
Um, to get to the point where I've released about 3 or 4, maybe 5 games that are all performing well, and I am creating the momentum to build a small game studio.
Yeah.
And I just want to make good games, and I kind of want to heal the damage that has been done by AAA because it's so bad now, and it's really disheartening as a gamer who grew up with so many, companies and games that like define my childhood now becoming these like really greedy, horrible corporate run
Preach.
stupid things, and they're ruining franchises, and it's actually like it hurts. And I want to try to it's kind of like the forest was destroyed and you start planting trees
Yeah.
to like bring it back. That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, Kai, that's a great dream. I hope you're able to make that a reality. And thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this entire episode with Kai. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, before you go, just one reminder, I am looking for partners to help me make this channel, and I'm looking so financially with channel memberships. Now, I just want to talk about my view of channel memberships just a little bit more for you who was clearly invested enough to and generous enough to listen to this whole episode. So normally the way channel memberships work is that you pay more to get more, but I actually don't love that model. I want everyone that is willing to give me anything, because I know everyone can't give the same amount, to get all this stuff. So there's really no benefit of giving more than the minimum, which is $5 per month. So if you want to support it all, that's amazing. But if you do choose to give more, it's just because you think that this content is valuable and it's something that you want to help put out into the world. So if you do join at any level, you'll get access to a members only Discord with myself. So we'll get to chat, talk about the channel, talk about game dev, and really just live our lives, virtually together. So thank you for considering that. It's really been a great journey, and I'm excited to see where we can go moving forward. If you're still looking for more game dev interviews, I think you will also enjoy this one on the screen. Thanks again. You're the best.